guys, thanks so much for coming. For those of you who don't know, my name's Rosh. There's a lot of stuff happening in the ecosystem at the moment, leading up to the anniversary event, which is the 25th. So I'll go through that a little bit later on in the presentation, so please bear with me. I think one of the things which I want to do at the moment is get everybody up to the same sort of level so that they understand what Elastos is. And then if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask your questions. And if I can't answer it now, I'll certainly answer it later. So firstly, does anyone have any questions, like burning them up at the moment, that they want to know? Nope?
Well, yeah, but they're pretty technical, so I'm not sure how much on the lever you are.
Yeah, so the answer to that is I've learned to become a little bit more technical, but I don't come from a technical background.
Can't answer it, then just say you can't
Of course, yeah, I'll do that. There are plenty of people, if they're not within this room, who can answer that question, certainly outside the room. So.
Sure, I'm going to shoot an email up once you get a mic, come here and ask.
Yeah, cool. All right. All right, so let's kick off. Firstly, let's start with why do we need Elastos in the first place? So these are just some of the things which I cooked up, and I think these are all problems with the world that everybody's familiar with and starting to see more and more of, and increasingly get frustrated and disillusioned by. So the first thing being that we have a large concentration of wealth and power that's coming onto the internet in particular, where we have the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons and Apples basically taking up all of the wealth within the ecosystems that we use. So there's a lot of concentrated power as well as wealth in there, and it makes it hard for anyone who's trying to start a business to actually make it. If they do, what ends up happening is they end up being taken over or they get destroyed by these businesses. So that's something that's close to my heart. I come from like a startup background, and it's something that you see all the time where it shouldn't really be happening. You want to have a strong base of small businesses, medium businesses and large businesses, but what we're seeing is just big companies and conglomerates that are beyond sort of government power to control, basically doing whatever they want now. The second thing that we are seeing, and this has really been a computer problem since the beginning of time, is just the lack of security. So insecure systems being designed both at the hardware level, operating system level, application level, and then internet and database level, which I'll go a little bit into depth today about. Allowing people to hack into centralized systems as well as your own computers and pretend to be someone else as a man-in-the-middle attack, or take over your machines and use them as a denial of service attack for, let's say, a government body or a particular website. So we're seeing more and more of that. I sort of get it flooded into my email because I'm interested in that space, and there's multiple examples of it every day. And then the third piece as well, which is for creatives and content creators alike, related to the first issue. There's no real way for you to make money out of the content that you create. So if you're a musician, for instance, you get maybe 8 cents out of every dollar. If you're going through Spotify, because you don't actually own the asset and you can't monetize it and control access or license or trade your digital goods online. So these are some of the things which we're seeing in the world today, which in particular for Elastos, is very well suited to solving some of these problems, or at least going a long way to eliminating a lot of it. So what is Elastos? Elastos is what I describe as a network operating system. So what does that mean? We're used to thinking of operating systems as a device-specific thing. So if I have my computer here, it has an operating system on it, and I'm updating it all the time whenever there's a security patch that needs to happen. And it's specifically related to this computer. A network operating system works similar to the internet. There's no versions of the internet, there's just the internet, and people just build on top of it as we go along. So there's no Windows 95, Windows 97, Windows 2000. The reason why this is important is because for machine-to-machine communications, as well as if we're going to move to an Internet of Things world, no one is sitting there kind of updating their fridge or their TV application like operating system on it. So what ends up happening over time is because they are connected to the internet all the time, they become more and more outdated, more and more vulnerable to hackers, and as I said before, they can get taken over and used for DDoS attacks. So is that clear in terms of like what a network operating system is versus a device operating system? Have I lost everybody? Yeah, feel free to like say yes. I'll try and like describe it another way if it's helpful. No? Okay. Cool. So how I want to do this is I want to kind of describe what the current system looks like, what blockchains currently in today's society look like, and then how an Elastos world would look like. So what I've done is I've tried to split it up into basically 4 layers so that it's easy to compare one ecosystem to the next ecosystem. And I'll kind of cut to the chase as far as why the pros and cons of each particular ecosystem. So firstly, at the hardware layer, so this is obviously hardware. Usually that's written in what's called C++. Then you've got the operating system layer, which is generally written in another language and isn't necessarily interoperable with the hardware. So let's just say in the case of Android, it's built in Java, and Java needs a bridge between the hardware and the operating system in order to control the hardware. What that does is it stops what's called a sandbox, which is a protected environment for those operating systems, and becomes a point where people can basically attack your systems. So there's vulnerability. Each of these red lines basically represents an area where you can be attacked as a hacker. So operating system level, then you've got the application level, and as you can see here, with each operating system, there's a different application for the same company that needs to be maintained and created, which creates a lot of cost implications, and it makes it very hard to, it requires a lot of resources, a lot of developer time to maintain all these different systems if you're going to be using it. The next step, so moving outside of the computer now, we're going to the internet. The internet is generally controlled by what you can see here, servers and databases. So the red boxes are meant to describe what are generally called like a honeypot, basically. So it's a place where there's lots of information or lots of money, and if one hacker can basically get into it, they can use that as ransom to extort people for lots and lots of money. So rather than hacking each individual computer here and that taking the same amount of effort, they could go into one, kind of like robbing a bank, rather than every house in a street. So this is the way that computing infrastructure works right now without a blockchain. And the good thing about it, how we've gotten to this point, is that it works really well because you can run all of the application power, so applications, on the actual hardware. So when you're using high computation applications like graphics or video games, it works really well in this system. The problem with it is that it's insecure. So there's lots of ways that you can leak data, get attacked, and we're starting to see the limitations of that now. We really can't we can't keep connecting devices to the internet and expect that we're not going to have more and more problems. So this page here basically just describes the pros and cons. So it's a traffic light system, so red, orange, and then green, which is basically the best of every world. One thing I wanted to draw your attention to is this section here, which is what I was relating to previously, which is talking about the value capture of the ecosystem and where it goes to. So if we talk about content creators, they get a very small piece of the pie because they can't get their assets out to people and control that access. The applications themselves, so this would be like the Facebooks, the YouTubes of the world, who basically control access and have monopolized kind of like various industries in on the internet. And then the network layer, which is the infrastructure that runs the internet. There's no good way to capture value within the network itself. Cool. So I'm moving really fast here. The reason is because you've got sort of the notes in front of you. If I'm going too fast, just let me know as well. Cool. So let's move to blockchain. So blockchain, the biggest thing that blockchain has been able to get us is, or the one thing that it offers us more than anything else is trust. So think of it as kind of like a unhackable database. And that's really what its sole core purpose is. And you can see it here. The problem, one limitation of blockchains at the moment is that you still have to use the existing internet and computer infrastructure in order to access it and get used to it. Blockchains like Ethereum didn't think about how you would have storage in a blockchain world, so they're still using things like centralized servers. They're now starting to think about how they would do that sort of stuff, but it's not really it's not scalable or powerful enough to handle it at the moment. The same thing for databases as well. So what we've gained in terms of trust, we've lost in terms of computing power. So one of the limitations of blockchains at the moment is people are trying to run all the dApps on the actual blockchain itself. And the blockchain is not meant to be able to handle that computing power. The way you should think about it is kind of like having one computer, one global computer, and everyone's trying to get access to that same computer at the same time to do everything from updating their banking records to running an app. There's people will hate me for giving this example, but like CryptoKitties. And what ends up happening is it congests the system because you just can't handle millions of people and millions of transactions on that particular blockchain. So this is where people talk about blockchain having limitations in terms of speed, scalability, or security. Basically, you have to give up one of those three in order to maximize the other two. And again, it's not something that we can scale out and grow into, and that's probably one of the biggest criticisms of blockchain at the moment. So coming back to this, you can see here privacy is something that we've gained out of this, but if we compare it to the previous slides, there are some things we've lost along the way. So where we've improved in some areas, we've lost in other areas. Coming back to the value capture as well, we've been able to grow the capacity for the network to capture value and share wealth a little bit better, but we've still got a long way to go in terms of where we want to get to. So then going to an Elastos world, and this looks very different. So some of the things which I want to highlight, coming back to the hardware, one of the things which you can see here is this little blue line. So Elastos, this is the network operating system or the runtime, which I was alluding to before. This actually sits on top of every operating system and can run on top of it. What it also does is it connects directly to the hardware. So unlike other virtual machines or applications, it basically has a direct link to the hardware and can talk to it in the same language because it's built in C++, which means that there's no data leakage because you never have to get out of the sandbox in order to run and execute code. So that's a big thing. The other thing you can see there is that it's one app. So rather than maintaining 4 different apps for different operating systems, you can have the one app that basically gets built and then runs on any operating system. The other thing that the runtime does is it controls it disables HTTPS calls. So an app is not able to actually connect directly to the internet. The runtime controls all of that, which takes a little bit of time to get your head around, but that's it basically makes it very, very secure. The next step, which I wanted to talk about, is what's called the Elastos carrier, which is re-architecting the internet itself. So rather than having what we had previously on the slides previous with centralized servers and databases, we now have essentially a peer-to-peer network between different computers. So there is no more central systems which can get hacked. It's distributed storage and it's distributed network packets, basically, in communication between everybody. The way that it's built as well is that everything is blacklisted by default, which means that there is no spam. You can't just get contacted by anyone. You have to whitelist people in order to open that line of communication. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is just the blockchains itself. So Elastos is interesting because it has a main chain and side chain structure. And to give some perspective as to how this would run, you can actually have, theoretically, the entire Ethereum blockchain run as a side chain or a friend chain on the Elastos blockchain system. So why this is interesting is because if we're coming to apps and we're talking about consumer apps, one of the limitations of existing blockchains is you kind of have to use the one blockchain and the one consensus mechanism in order to run everything. And it's pretty much impossible to have every use case covered by one blockchain and one way of doing things. So the way that Elastos has thought about this is said, we're going to have all the application and computing power done on your device. And then you can connect to any blockchain that you want to run a specific requirement that you have for that application. So if you want to have Ethereum smart contracts, you can call Ethereum smart contracts. If you want to have an Elastos ID system, you can call that. And you can basically interoperate between all these different blockchains, and the whole system is neutral. It's agnostic as to which one you use. So if you wanted to use Neo as a smart contract for a specific use case, you can do that too. The biggest thing and the gains that we get from re-architecting this whole system, because it's complex as anything, is that we've reversed the problems of current blockchains. We now have the hardware running all of the device, all of the application computation. So now we can run heavy computational stuff like graphics and video games and all of these sorts of things that require a lot of computing power. And we have been able to architect it in a way that security is baked in. It's built into the system, and rather than opting into security, it's already there. Okay, cool. So as you can see there, green everywhere. The other thing which, coming back to my original points, you can get out of this system is that for the first time, actually I might go back. For the first time, you can actually register your digital assets on the blockchain, and you can control access to it. And I'll explain how that works. So in order to run an application or get access to a file, say for instance for music, I'm a musician, I register my asset onto the blockchain, and with that it comes with an ID. So the asset itself has an ID, the application has an ID, and I have an ID. So I'm the owner of that asset. So the asset has an ID, application has an ID, and I have an ID. All three of those things need to match in order for me to run that music file. So even if I download it onto another computer or someone else downloads the file, because it's encrypted by default, they can't run it, because what has to happen is they run that asset, or they try and access that asset. It'll then check with the Elastos main chain and see whether I have access to that file, and that file is exactly what it's meant to be. The application is exactly what it's meant to be, and the asset itself hasn't been tampered with either. So if all those three things match, then it'll run. If I don't have access to that file, say for instance, it's a friend's file, I've downloaded it on my computer, and because I need an ID in order to access that file, it doesn't match the property rights on the blockchain, it won't run. If the file itself has been tampered with, then it'll come up with a new hash as well, and it won't run. If the application has been tampered with, and I try and run it, again, it won't run. And then the same thing for, application, myself, and the asset itself. So think of it like Google Drive, I guess. So you have to be connected to the internet in order to verify these things. And if you aren't able to verify it, then it won't execute and won't run. So what that means is that you have piracy basically taken away from the system entirely. People can download the same file anywhere, but they can't actually run it unless they have the property rights to it. Yeah.
How would you define an asset?
So the way that I think of it is kind of like, let's just say Adobe, right? Adobe has a PDF, right? You would have an equivalent PDF software on Elastos, right? And with that, you publish this PDF onto the blockchain. It then becomes encrypted as a file. Ask your question again, I've sort of gotten lost.
How do you define an asset?
An asset, okay, so the PDF would be the asset itself.
Like
yeah.
PDF, JPEGs, music files?
Anything you want, yeah. Anything digital content-wise could be an asset. It wouldn't be that specific file format per se, but it would be the equivalent of it. Yeah. So the question?
Do you want questions along the way or at the end?
Happy to have them now if it's easier.
Well, just had you tell me how you run it. Like if you want at the end and at the end.
I'll ask you a question.
Oh, okay. So there's a couple of few there, even stuff on the first slide. But
okay.
Even at this point here, just I have an asset. Let's go with your PDF, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've written a book. You got a PDF. You put it in there.
Yes.
Now, I have to use an Elastos runtime to look at it. So if I sell it to someone, they have to. So I'm locked into that ecosystem, kind of like a Kindle. If you want to read that book, you must buy a Kindle. You must use a Kindle. It's the only way out.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to buy into.
It is. It is a lot to buy into.
In theory, yes, it's locked down, but many companies have done that before, and the problem getting in is I don't want to have to buy your Kindle or your operating system or your browser or some people. So if I don't have that, then I can't participate in your world.
Correct. Yes, that's right. So it's a valid criticism, and I've asked that question as well. Like other people have asked that question, and the way the guys answer it essentially is you can choose wherever you want to go, right? What this ecosystem offers is a whole bunch of things that you can't do in the regular internet. You can't register these assets. You can't protect yourself as, say, a digital content creator. So to some extent, they can't guarantee your protection outside of this system. So the only way that you can really gain the value of this network is by being a part of it. The way that they've architected it is basically to be as neutral as they can be. So it's basically an infrastructure system, right? So they don't care how you run your business on it. They don't care whether you use different blockchains or anything like that. It's just a case of...
Don't get me wrong, I'm for it. I'm just saying it is Big Brother. I have to be and I have to play by their rules. No excuse. I'm on their system, otherwise the bets are off.
Yeah, so
cool.
It's So the only thing that I think the guys would have probably, I mean guys informally, but that they would have take issue with is probably the Big Brother aspect of it.
I don't mean like Big Brother like in this spying on you, but I'm like they could. You don't know. All that was disapproved. It's open source. I get all that. So you have to buy into that.
Yes.
Otherwise, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think people are missing. I think it's kind of like, I'm safe. Everything you do must and have to be an Elastos thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So surveillance is it's a serious issue, right? And people ask about it all the time. And in particular, with this particular project, part of it was funded by Foxconn for a while, right? So I'm just sharing
It's
this.
owned by one company, you can say it's open source. It's
Yes,
distributed,
yeah.
You can go through all that sort of stuff, and I guess that's the education that you've got to kind of buy into, to say yes, and it's really the internet, and there's really no one owning it, and you've got to buy into all that. Right?
Yeah.
You still got to buy into it.
Sure.
It's a big leap.
Yeah. So I'll just finish off my thought. That people worry about this being too closely aligned to a Chinese government project. Basically, part of it was funded by Foxconn, but Foxconn left it and they withdrew their funding because Rong, who's the founder of the business, or not business, the foundation, wouldn't commit to it being a Chinese project. He refused to commit to it as a Chinese operating system. And so they withdrew the funding because Foxconn knew that they couldn't run this and make it successful at the time, which was 2012 or something like that, without the Chinese government support. So just wanted to kind of share that thought. Yep, go for it.
We're talking about digital assets, right?
Yes.
Protection, about the ability to resell to other people, those kind of things.
Yes.
In my experience, digital assets are quite tricky. Like it's easy to duplicate a PDF, it's easy to duplicate a video and take it out from the blockchain in this case. So I'm just trying to look at the weak spot, right?
Yeah. So you're right. So in the current system, you would have, say, a PDF. You'd put it up on a blockchain and you would unencrypt it, and then it would be basically on the existing system, and it's still unencrypted, so you can still share it, right? So that's the limitation of blockchains and digital assets as it is today. In this world, the moment you publish it, it's already encrypted, right? And it's always encrypted at every point in time. So only by having the hashes match between the owner of it and the application being the correct application to run it, and the asset itself being exactly what it says to be, all as registered on the blockchain, then you can run it. So even if you were to download the same file, it would basically be a closed box. You couldn't actually run it unless you had ownership of it. So, and you can only gain ownership of it by the person who owning it, selling it to you, or licensing it to you. So think of it as a world without middlemen. So today, I can't control people reproducing, say, a song. So I trust Spotify to stream it to someone else, and the only way that you can get access to that is by having a Spotify account and paying Spotify. Spotify charges, say, $10, and $9 of it goes to them, and $1 goes to me, right? Who's done the most of the work? I'm the person who's creating the music, right? Is it fair that I have 10% of that entire value chain? Up to you, right? So in this world, because piracy is basically really, really hard to do, right? The economic incentives change. So me as an artist, if I know that I can sell it directly to you without having to go through a middleman, then maybe I don't want to charge $10. Maybe I want to charge just $1, right? Maybe I want to charge 50 cents, because now I can't it's more affordable for me to do it. I can make the same amount of money, right? And now I can reach anyone. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah. Yep.
So it seems like the infrastructure is built around there still being a connection between the runtime and the main chain, which still inherently lies on the internet.
Yeah.
There's still a point of communication from your runtime to the network, to blockchain, whatever it may be.
Yes.
How do you secure that line of
Sure.
communication?
Yeah, so I didn't go into too much depth around that, but that's basically this, right? So this middle layer here, which I was explaining, kind of re-architects the internet. So that part of this whole system is called the Elastos carrier. It's a peer-to-peer system, that's rather than using the same protocols to communicate between different devices, you're using that to communicate and also store data in a distributed way using IPFS. So in short, that's kind of the answer. We can unpack that whole carrier thing, but it's a massive thing along with all the other areas. So I'm trying to kind of like give a broad overview so that people can understand it. And if you want to dive into any particular area, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, carrier in particular is a massive thing. What I can say though is that they announced that they're going to have 1 million nodes using this carrier by the end of the year. So they've got, just a couple of days ago, they announced a deal with a company that supplies set-top boxes for like a TV, for instance. And they're using the Elastos carrier because it allows them to do over-the-air updates for the set-top boxes at 70% cheaper than what they can currently do it at. So for them, it's an economic boom, right? It's so much cheaper for them to do that, and it's a huge cost to be able to update both firmware as well as software on top of it. This is a company that sells like distributes for Disney, Samsung, like seriously big companies. So the fact that they can distribute 1 million of these nodes in the space of like 3 months tells you a lot about the kinds of partners and the kind of speed at which they're basically building out the system. So we're not talking about theory anymore. It's actually kind of happening. Cool.
So Rosh, carrier boxes will replace current internet essentially, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so we're going to have totally decrypted peer-to-peer internet instead of the wholly being hackable internet we currently have.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Cool. So again, coming back to the value capture, I think I kind of explained that with the Spotify example. Creators can now have a bigger piece of this pie, and so we can start seeing new industries being created. We can see new wealth being distributed and created in a way that hasn't been available to people in the past. So the way that I look at this, and I think probably the reason why I'm so enthused about it is because the current system doesn't enrich a whole bunch of industries, generally creative industries. So there's no real incentive for people to stay in the current system if that's what they do, because it's not working for them. They have to put a lot of effort in to get very little of it back and generate wealth for themselves. They do it because they love it, not because they're going to get rich by it. Very few people do. And so when I think about adoption, I think of it in a way of like incentives, right? So why would someone want to move from, say, this existing system to this new system? Well, this, if it gets enough adoption, allows them to make wealth in a way that they previously haven't been able to do. So you've got a whole bunch of disenfranchised groups of people who can't make money out of a system. There's a lot of incentive for them to move to another system. Now, yes, there's like, you don't have the mass market there just yet because it's brand new and people don't know about it. But given time, these things will start to take up adoption. So there's a good analogy, or there was a good explanation of this by a guy called Chris Dixon, who's a VC at a VC company called Andreessen Horowitz. And he talks about open systems versus closed systems. So open systems like Elastos, which are open source, anyone can have a look at it and contribute to it, usually come out of the box crap, basically, like totally unusable. But what happened, and conversely, a closed system would be something built by Microsoft. They own the code, they kind of, maybe not a good example because now a lot of it's open source, but say Microsoft of 10 years ago. They have a closed system, it comes out of the box, generally pretty good for people to use. Like for an average consumer, they can use it, it looks pretty. But what happens over time is the improvement in that system is incremental, because no matter how big that company and how powerful it may be, they're still constrained by the resources that they have, the amount of developers they have, the amount of money they have, the amount of time they have. And so they incrementally get better. An open source system starts out of the box, let's just say 50% worse than the closed system. But if they capture the imagination of developers and people who want to build on it, what ends up happening is their improvement becomes exponential. And it usually happens by stealth, even, like by accident, or not by accident, but like it creeps up on you. And after, say, 4 years, whatever the time period is, they start to become basically equivalent to each other, but this one's on a trajectory like that and the other one's on a trajectory like that. And at that point there, that's where people kind of go, oh yeah, it was always obvious that like this open system was going to work. But before then, it's harder to make that call. So a good example of that would be the internet. The internet was an open system that basically people could use. There are other systems that people could use as well, but the internet, because it was free and open and decentralized, people could build on top of it and they didn't have to ask for permission to do that. So that's when it was allowed to be built upon, I think, early 1990s. So that's why I'm so excited about this system, because it not only solves a lot of problems within the existing system and the new blockchain system, so it allows it to be scalable, fast, and secure by default. It also has the capacity to move to machine-to-machine, a machine-to-machine world. So it's built specifically to run on IoT devices. So you could have your TV run on Elastos, you could have your smart fridge run on Elastos, you could have government like weather stations or whatever else running it, and you can be sure that it's as secure as it can be, certainly more secure than the existing systems that exist today. Yeah, go.
I just kind of want to challenge a few things that you said.
Please do.
I think you've just been sold on it, and you've just
go for it. Go for it.
The thing about Spotify, for example, where Spotify keep $9 and you keep $1, you don't have to put your song on Spotify. The only reason it's there is because it's a marketplace, right? It's the only reason. Same with Facebook. It's a marketplace. It's the only reason people go there, right? Elastos is just an extension of the web. Adapt is literally a website, no different. So if I put my song on a website on the internet and I put my song on Adapt, who's going to find it? No one. So what I have to do is I have to create a marketplace on Elastos. Sound familiar?
Yes.
So if I create a marketplace and people go to it, I want 90%. Otherwise, don't use my DAP.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right.
So the problem is identical, and it seems like a lot of what we're saying is it's different. It's not. It's identical.
So,
right? Okay. I'll finish it for a minute, but you answer that one then.
Yeah. So I can only deal with like small bits, so I'll try and answer that one. So the difference in this ecosystem is in say what you're talking about there, you'd have a closed system. So Facebook would be a closed marketplace, right? You can only operate and do things within that environment, right? With this, say for instance for the asset, which we're talking about, let's just say music, it would be in a file format that multiple applications can use, right? So in the example which you're talking about, you have one dominant player that is that marketplace, everyone goes to it.
Like Spotify. You've got to use Spotify. Or you can download it, but you still got to use Spotify.
Yeah. So in that case, they have market power in their marketplace. You're absolutely right. You need to have a marketplace to be able to do that. But in this sort of system, if you have one that abuses its power and becomes too greedy, it's much easier to build something equivalent to it that
someone could build another Spotify if we don't like it.
Yeah, like you're right. I think
I guess what I'm just saying that there are certain things that they're throwing out that we're swallowing, but it's not real. And like Facebook, for example, you don't have to use Facebook, but it's considered the big brother. Don't use it.
Yeah. So part of the reason why we use Facebook is because we don't have ID as a protocol on the internet. So there was no shared standardized ID protocol. There's things like TCP/IP. There's all these other things that allow you to.
I would argue we use Facebook because we don't like MySpace. That's why we use Facebook.
Yeah,
There's 50,000 other social medias out that we could use, but we choose Facebook because our friends are on it. That's all it is.
Yeah, Facebook has basically become like a quasi standard for ID on the blockchain, right? So one of the things which Elastos does is it offers there's a sidechain that allows you to create and mint IDs, and it's IDs for assets, yourself, everything. It works similar to like a Bitcoin wallet. You don't need permission in order to create an ID. So in your case, like say Facebook, well, you have to get permission from Facebook. If they don't like what you're doing, they'll just take it away and you lose everything. Right? In this world, you don't have that. There's no one who gives you permission to do anything. Like on here, you have.
I get you, but if I have a dApp that's Facebook and you do stuff that's hurting people, I will take that away. I own the dApp.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's no different to Facebook.
Yeah.
I own the dApp. Facebook's just an app.
It is, but it would use, for instance, the ID that's registered on Elastos. You wouldn't have your own ID on.
Yeah, I get that, but I'm just saying, as far as the dApp goes, like I see other Internet of Things, absolutely. I don't want people attacking my fridge and making my groceries go off. That's where I see a perfect thing for Elastos. Or banks, where I want to remove all those attack things. So if you want to use my app, the bank, you just download Elastos. I can see that. But everything else, it's just the internet. It's no different. But it seems to be pushed as if all that's going to change. I don't see how that's impossible.
Well, there is a difference though. Facebook's a centralised monopoly.
It doesn't matter to you. That's a technology. How does it matter to me?
What Elastos is bringing to us is the ability to have decentralised applications, okay? So a decentralised Facebook will be built and it'll integrate with Elastos. So we're at the stage where this technology is evolving there.
I get the tech, but my wife doesn't care about that. So in the end, it doesn't matter.
You're right. So
it's like everyone's got a telephone, but no one cares how it works.
Yes, you're right.
And when there's a decentralised Facebook,
how does that change
doesn't
anything?
throw me off because I have different politics, then people will gravitate towards that and they won't need to know the technology.
If someone
does
do that, then they can do that. They can, although it's distributed, my app is still going to control it. It's just my app's distributed, and when one goes down, the others are still up. That's what the distributor gives me. I can still change that app. I can still upload my dApp, and they've all changed.
Yeah, so we're in violent agreement.
No. What I'm saying is, it's no different to Facebook. It's no different.
So one of the things which you'll be able to offer, which you don't get, say, in Facebook, is
what was what?
So if we're talking about, say, social networks, this is something that comes in. Well, I've thought about it a little bit as well, and this may not be a complete answer to your question, but try and offer another alternative. Is at the moment, again, coming back to like the $1 for Facebook, you use it. Well, I'll use Facebook in this example. So we use it for free. There's a lot of utility there. Why would I want to move from Facebook to some other thing? There's no incentive for me to do that. Right?
There's 50,000 out there already.
What if you had one that paid you to use it, right? So by being on that system, say for instance doing likes, curating things, doing all that sort of stuff, you're actually earning something. There would be a lot of people who spend a hell of a lot of time on social media, myself included, who would benefit from something like that. And again, what's going to move you from one set to another? Maybe it's not immediate, right? Like we won't go from we won't step into one world and then move into the other immediately.
Gotcha.
But there will be a wave, and there will be a point at which there will be a tipping point at which it makes sense for people to get all the same benefits that they have here in a new environment. So
I'm pretty deep in the Elastos world, right? So I'm really just being hard because I'm just okay. Wikipedia does that right now. People groom it.
Mm-hmm.
If they got paid, which they're doing it for free, but if they got paid, there'd be more people. Same thing as the internet, though. So what? It's just, how is it different? It's just another, it's distributed. So what? So it's distributed, who cares? Doesn't change anything. What I'm saying is whether it's Facebook or whether it's a marketplace, it's always going to be a place where that $90 or 90%, 10% thing will happen. Even I don't see why it wouldn't happen here. So I'm just saying, picking on things like that doesn't seem to make sense. And I'm just trying to point out that it just seems like there are 10 other things that I could pick that would make sense that I don't talk about.
Yeah.
But they're picking on Facebook and things like that, and I'm just like, well, then you don't have to use it. And it's just going to be another app.
Yeah. And like, you could well be right. Like there's...
I was just looking for maybe someone else thought of something just to come back.
Well, so there'll probably be people who will watch this and be able to come up with more sensible answer than
I'm sure there is an answer, but no one can really sum it up.
I think you're kind of, you've got a bit of a mix between critical mass of how do you attract users to a platform. Like, why is Facebook so popular? Because all my friends are on it. Correct. That's the only reason. Literally. How do you get all of your friends on it, right? That's the question. So there's that part of it. That part of your question is about how do you get users? How do you incentivize people to use your system? The second part is how do you actually maintain that system to not spy on you, to not do all of these nasty things that Facebook does, which is harvest data and sell it and make money on it. So your point is, if you're in that system where you have a DApp Facebook, how do you, let's say you have it, right? You've got a DApp. Everyone's on your DApp. Yep. You can change it overnight to harvest and sell data. Yep. Right? You can do that. So your point is that you can still end up in the same scenario with a DApp as you can with Facebook. Okay. So they're two separate things, right? Yes. There's critical mass, and then there's how do you stop the DApp from harvesting data. Yeah. So I think the biggest focus for Elastos, if I'm getting this right, is that on the DApp, you cannot do those things. You cannot harvest that data like you can on Facebook. How do you actually leverage users on the DApp?
Just wait. Harvest data is from the front end. Yeah. Right? So what we're saying is, I can't copy anything that someone's written there. But I want to copy and paste it and send it to them. If I can't do that, I mean, there are things that just normally you want to do. So you're saying I can't do that? It's going to be annoying. Sometimes I right-mouse click on a photo and send it to someone who doesn't have Facebook.
Well, you only can't do that if I make sure that content is locked.
We don't have the answer, but you know what I'm trying to say is like there's that 5% that maybe you got it, but generally speaking, it's the same thing. Right?
So it depends how you design it, guys. It depends totally how you design it.
But the front end sits on the VM, which is JavaScript. Could be any app. It's just a web app that sits in the runtime on any language, or half a dozen languages.
So I think it's right on that. Yeah. He raised a good question, which I think, a good point, which I hadn't thought to answer it this way. In that example where you've got, say, photos, partly locks you into Facebook, right? Like you can't take those photos out of that system easily and then transport it into a MySpace equivalent, right? If you're building dApps on this world, you actually own that photo, right? It's registered somewhere else. So if you have an app that starts to go rogue and starts wanting to do all of these different things, it's easy to move to the next one, right? So
not until the damage is already done. I think the value proposition of Elastos isn't necessarily that you can have your own self-sovereign wealth, and that if I'm an artist and I want to sell my artwork, I have ownership as to where that goes and who owns it, and I get 100% of the profit. Elastos, to me, to describe the value proposition as something like a data self-sovereign sort of issue is to argue that it's similar to a DApp. It's not like it seems more like a decentralized internet, right?
Yeah.
So it has a lot of value proposition, but it's not a be-all, end-all solution to the issues that we have. Like we have issues with what gets stored on the blockchain. So for example, if I want to send a photo to a friend that happens to be on Facebook, and if Elastos proposes to what you said that I can't do that, that might not be true because that data is not locked to the Elastos blockchain. And it's almost just unreasonable to put everything on the blockchain. It's heavy, it's clunky, and it's expensive. So, yeah, I think sorry, kind of wanted to segue into my question.
Go for it.
One burning question I had was your idea of identity, and that seems to be a big selling point for Elastos in the way that it functions and the way that you can access your data. How does an identity look like? Does it look like an Ethereum public key, or how do you have the interoperability between machines? Do you keep a private key in your head? Do you write it down?
Yeah.
I kind of struggle to kind of make that tangible.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I
assume it's automatic.
it's.
Assume
Yeah, it's just like cached.
We'll have to get with the flow on that one.
Yeah, just go with the flow.
I think that's probably the answer right now. So it's kind of a good segue to the first year anniversary. So this is happening 25th of August, so next week-ish. One of the things which they'll be demoing is a thing called Trinity. So Trinity is the browser for Elastos. So you can use it on it'll be available on Android. So when it comes to, say, ID, for instance, the whole concept of it is that it's similar to running, like just using a normal app today. You don't have to remember a private key. You don't have to remember all of these things in order to access and enter this world. It should be as easy as using any app that you see today. How they do that, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm a user experience designer in blockchain, and that's a big problem.
It is a massive problem.
The ownership of the data and how you can keep tabs on that. If it's just on my phone, what if I lose my phone, you know? So,
You lose it.
yeah, you lose it. You're pretty much
It would be like an
fucked.
IP address. You can't understand it, so you have a domain name. So you'll create a unique, hi, my name's Jenny, and that is your unique ID.
Yeah.
That'll map to that unique ID. So
Yeah.
just DNS
Well,
it.
your identity would be immutable, but if you lose the keys to it, then it's
Yeah. I think that's one of the challenges with blockchain in general. And I don't know whether they have an answer to that necessarily right now. They might in the future.
Won't Trinity have the wallet?
Yeah.
Trinity will have the wallet, right? So your wallet's integrated with your browser, so it should work on any platform. You know?
But
It's more a case of, I think your question is, if you lose that, how do you get it? Right? Like, how do you come back and restore it if you've lost?
because the same issues are being faced with MetaMask versus Trust Wallets versus Brave Browser and all the centralized web applications that help to actually get people to access apps. Being able to move from your account associated with your private key and your public address to another environment where you need that same identity can be a bit tricky.
I think part of that is multi-sig wallets. That's sort of the, like with Bitcoin, they solve it with multi-sig, so you've got 2 of 3 keys. So
and you can do that,
you need 2 of 3, right? Or you need like,
or you can
3
copy
or
the
5,
private
whatever
key
it
to
is.
the other address.
If you lose one, like you use your phone, that you use most of the time, you quickly get your other 2, move your identity from this wallet to a new one. As long as you can update and transfer yourself somewhere else, even though you've lost that one key, you can perish this identity and then use the next one.
Yeah.
But you still need 2 of 3, right? So what if you lose 2?
Yeah, but arguably
There's
it's
always a risk.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to get people to understand that identity and data doesn't have to live in one place.
That's right.
It's everywhere. So.
But at the same time, you are right. If you lose it, that's it.
Yeah.
That's part of the whole immutability thing. You can't have the best of both.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Cool. Does that make sense to people? Are we going off on like a tangent?
Can I touch on the digital? So digital media. I think the biggest problem is if you create a piece of art or a song, whatever you want to make, that's digital. It's very simple to modify a very small part of it, and it becomes something new.
Yeah, that's a law issue.
You've got like you change one transaction in a block, and it hashes to something completely different.
Yeah.
So if I change 1 pixel on your work of art, I can then register that as mine, and I can sell that. So I don't know how you can nail that down. I don't know if there's answers in terms of how you secure it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got central entities because you have people that look at a piece of art and go, yep, this is an exact copy. You changed one thing. And there's legal disputes about what constitutes, new work that you've made because you've changed something, and what is already existing. So
So that's an interesting one. Yeah. So part of piracy is right, like who actually owned it? How do you prove that you owned it? right? Like you were the creator.
Even if you do own the original, I can just change it a little bit.
Exactly, right? So part of the blockchain solution about this is that you create a work of art. You register it on the blockchain. It's now time-stamped that you created this artwork. It looked like this, and this is how it looks like if it gets decrypted, right? Anything that comes after that, it's much easier to prove that it was a copy, or someone basically lifted 80% of it, and you should have a license, or someone else should pay to have used the majority of your work.
But who enforces that?
Who enforces that? That's a separate thing entirely, right? But my point is that you now have tools which you don't have today in order to prove something much more exactly, or more in a more concrete way than what you can today. So that's one of the powers of, say, blockchain in particular. It's immutable, so it's much easier to do that. Does that kind of make sense?
So you're talking about blockchain in general, not just Elastos.
Well, when I'm talking about blockchain, I'm talking about this Elastos system in particular. I think it offers that more so than just blockchain on its own.
Well, I mean, you've got real estate transactions that happen on Bitcoin. You have an entity that issues from a wallet a certain transaction that says this transaction represents a house.
Yeah.
And once you move it from point A to point B, you now have given over ownership. Just like I can take a file, I can take a book that I've written, I can hash it, and I can lock it into a transaction. I can say this book has been locked in at this time. It's got a specific block date. Anything after that is a copy.
Yeah.
I can do that now with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily need a new system to do that.
Sure. You're right, and that's, I think, where this offers the most potential is in this digital asset aspect, not so much in property rights and real physical assets, right? So that being a representation of a physical asset, right? You can easily reference that, or it's easier to reference what that is. Digital assets, you just don't have the capacity to do that easily, and there's no way to protect it in this sort of runtime environment. I'm kind of going over myself, but in an Elastos world, it's much harder for you to copy and replicate and use something because it's a closed it's an ecosystem that supports all of these technical enforcements at various levels. You could try and do the same thing today, but there's so many ways that it can basically be hacked, right? So that's kind of the value proposition, if that makes sense. That's why you need an Elastos system.
In terms of, so you're saying the Elastos system itself protects users, right? I completely understand. You've got the runtime, you access it and use it, and it's a secure network. Yeah. My question is, the runtime itself. How can Elastos guarantee that the runtime cannot be altered or hacked or broken? I mean, you've got giants, you've got Microsoft, you've got Apple, both working really hard on DRM, on things that secure your operating system. If I buy, Photoshop, I need a license key. And that still is within the ecosystem that is Microsoft. So if we just replace the word Windows or iOS with Elastos, the same issues, right? Everyone's putting billions of dollars towards securing that environment. How would Elastos?
It's a really good question. And did you want to?
Yeah, because the runtime's got to be downloaded from Elastos. So if there is one bit that's different, it won't run.
Yeah, but
you go to Elastos, download it again, set it up and run.
So I think the question is, how can you guarantee that this runtime, just like any other thing, is unhackable?
Oh no, you can probably hack it, but it won't run. So it won't. If you change anything on it, as soon as it starts up, it's just going to do a bit check or something on it. It won't match and just say it will not run, and
One of
just
the
get
existing
frustrated.
the one that matches the hash correctly has holes in it. I think that's the question.
If it comes from Elastos, now I'm guessing if it's coming from Elastos, it's going to have the connection to the internet. Is going to have some sort of, I would pass in some sort of hash that comes back. That's an algorithm that says I'm real, right?
But then you're talking about a central entity.
Well, Elastos is. That's what I'm saying. It still is. That's why I said the big brother thing, but that's a wrong word. But I'm saying it is essential. It is Elastos. You have to be in that ecosystem. So what I'm saying
there's no central system yet.
No, I get that. I'm just saying it's Elastos, right? So what I'm saying is the runtime, if you hack it, when you hack it, you can hack around it, I guess. No one cares, but it's going to and from the internet. That's obviously going to be checked, that it's authentic, that it came from, that no one's hacked with that. So it doesn't. So the security is not tampered with.
Everything's digitally signed,
Yeah,
and
everything
the
will be fine.
signatures have to match before anything.
I think maybe hack is the wrong word to use. Maybe exploit would be a better word.
Same thing. I'd say.
Can't be
I'll take off one if you want, but to me, that's not a problem.
Well, okay, let's say for example, if I have a hardware wallet, right, I've got a device that holds my coins on it, and then this device communicates with a network, any type of blockchain network.
Yep.
The communication that happens is the only weak point, because once you have a transaction that's sent to the network, it gets verified. There's certain rules you cannot break. Like I can't just say I'm moving this money from point A to point B, and the network just goes, yeah, whatever, that's fine. There's rules on the network.
Yep.
The problem is you have an independent device that communicates with this network over a certain protocol, over TCP/IP, IPFS, whatever it may be. You can intercept that. You can trick the device into thinking it's communicating with the network. You can go in between yourself and the device.
Sure.
That's the point I'm trying to make, because if you have a physical, well, how can you say that?
Yeah,
I mean, countless people have made the claim about certain hardware pieces that are unhackable, that you cannot get in between it and something else.
No, I'm on my computer, I'm on my router. If I'm going to talk from my runtime, it's going to go through that router. I'm going to get a message. I'm going to catch what's coming through, no doubt. I will see the message sent, but that would be encrypted with a piece from the, and I'm guessing here because I didn't build it, right? But I'm guessing there is something as a part of that runtime that's a part of the packet that's sent that says you're good. So when it goes through the carrier, if that doesn't, that little tiny piece doesn't match, it's back off.
That's right.
Something. So to me, that's not hard to do. It's their problem, but not hard.
Yeah. I think part of the answer as well is I mean, these are all really good answers. Part of the answer as well is when we're talking about open source systems. Previously, there was no. A little bit to what I was explaining before about content creators. People do it because they love it. Right? Same thing for open source contributors. Right? They contribute to open source software because they love it, not because they're going to get paid for it. There's just no way previously that you could be incentivized to do it. Right? That's why you have big companies that basically sponsor open source systems and pay for the development of it. Because there is no economic model that rewards people for contributing to it. That's one of the powerful things about blockchain, right? Like now you can have an incentive structure built into it so that people get rewarded for doing things on it, contributing to it. So if we're talking about SSL, for instance, when there was Heartbleed, they looked at that, like SSL for certificates for e-commerce and security for the web. That gets used by everyone, right? There's billions of people who use it. When they went back and looked at that exploit and they saw who was maintaining it, there was something like 3 people in the world doing it, right? And that's like how things get mixed, right? In a system like this where you basically get rewarded for contributing and maintaining stuff and finding exploits, etc., in a way that you can actually transact and use it, not just karma points because you are a good person, then maybe there's more developers looking at these exploits, looking at the system, maintaining it, building on it. That's where things get really interesting. And again, that's one of the things that gets me excited about this particular system. It's open source, people can look at it, people can critique it, they can improve upon it, they can build new things on it, and they get rewarded for doing it. So it's a good segue to this. So Cyber Republic, which is a interesting name, especially when you hear it for the first time, is essentially the community aspect of Elastos. So there were 33 million coins minted at the Genesis block, and 16 million of them have been reserved for this. So this is essentially the community aspect of the ecosystem, where if you're a developer or if you're someone like me running a meetup, you can propose tasks and you can propose projects, and you can get funded through this system. And this system is not Elastos. At the moment, it's Elastos saying, yes, we think this is a great idea. We're going to give you a little bit of money to put on the good food here or buy drinks, etc., etc. But in the future, it'll be anyone on Elastos who, anyone on Elastos basically, will have the ability to vote on these things that get proposed to the system. So if, for instance, I have an app and I want to get it funded by the community, and I think it's a really great infrastructure thing, I can propose it to Cyber Republic, and then the community will vote and say, yes, we think this is a great idea, we'll fund like 1 million Elastos coins to do it, right? This is going to be something really interesting, and they're going to announce this as well, and rebrand it, and have a whole new website for it at the anniversary event. So the 25th they'll launch that. The constitution will probably be released for people to have a look at and critique and improve, and I think that's a really exciting point for everybody in this room and everybody in the world, because we can actually look at a constitution or something like that and influence it. There's no one person in this system who will have more rights to basically influence the system than anyone else in this room. So talking about representative governance, it's going to be a really interesting thing. And this will be a work in progress. This will be something that they'll probably release, and we'll be able to interact with it and do cool things on there, but there'll probably be holes as well. There'll be things that aren't working that well, and they will massage it and try and make it better. But obviously the idea is that we start off with a good platform that we can work off, and we're not having to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, this is something really interesting. I would recommend, if you're interested, register. It won't cost anything to do that, but it will give you the capability to look at some of these things, have your voice heard, and have a say in how this whole ecosystem basically develops from this point on. The idea is that at the moment there are people who control large aspects of this project and propose things, and they're the core team, obviously, the people who founded this thing. But what they want to do over the next year is relinquish control of this stuff and put it onto the community to run it. So how that transitions will be an interesting thing to see, but I think it's a really exciting opportunity for people to get involved in. I know for myself, there's so many parts of the existing political and economic systems that are just broken, need to be redone. This is like an opportunity for me and you to put a say in how you think you could do this better. So yeah, what else was there? Firstly, is there any other questions that people had? Yeah.
I'm just, I don't know if you want to.
Well,
if you finished,
I'm pretty much finished.
Okay.
There's a couple of things which I wanted to share with everybody.
You can do that, and I'll put it to the end if you want.
So one of the things which was announced is there's going to be an airdrop on the 20th. So for those people who own Elastos, there's a BitGames airdrop that's happening on the 20th, I think. One of the things you need to do in order to claim or get this airdrop is to register an ETH address on your Elastos wallet. And one of the things about it is if you're adding Elastos to it after you've registered this ETH address, you have to keep re-registering it. So just make sure that you're doing that. There's going to be roughly 11 of this BitGames coin for every one Elastos that you hold. But that's subject to change, just based on how many people take it up. The other thing is, I've already mentioned this, but the smart box got released, and for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to try and get a photo of it.
packets was on Elastos, it wouldn't have got hacked. I mean, it wouldn't have got hacked.
Yes, that's what I keep telling them. So I'm basically trolling them at the moment. For those of you who don't know, the BTC Markets is just an exchange in Australia, and they've had problems which they claim of being DDoS attacked, and this has been an ongoing problem for them for the last how many days. And so I've been, as they've been tweeting that, I've been live tweeting back to them and basically trolling them, saying you should build on Elastos because you won't have DDoS attacks anymore. I don't think they appreciate that, but it's a little bit of fun for me. So this smart box is this thing that you can see here, right? The Elastos smart box. It's being controlled by, this particular example is showing this TV using the Elastos set-top box and being controlled by someone in South Africa. So directly plugging in from South Africa, going through the Chinese firewall to control this TV. Right, so that's one of the things about having this peer-to-peer carrier network, is that you can go past firewalls. So there's going to be 1 million of these by the end of the year. I'll be heading off to Chiang Mai later, next week. And I've been lucky enough, like anyone who attends that is going to get one of these. So I'll bring it over for the next meetup. You guys can have a look at it, and we can maybe plug it into this and see whether we can do stuff. So that's a cool thing. What else?
So I can watch a Netflix show at the same time as my buddy in South
Africa? Maybe. But say for instance, one of the use cases which kind of got me excited is because everyone's using the same network, right? We think of using a TV as it's only using like a TV application layer. If I was on my phone and this person, my friend, was in China, I could basically Skype in, equivalent of like video phone myself in to that person's TV and interact with them and answer a call. Like, that's a pretty cool thing. So that's just one example, for instance, which I haven't seen today that could be, it is possible in this world. Another thing. So the founder of Elastos, his name's Roshan Ghadamian. He's coming to Melbourne in September. So we're running an event on Friday, the 21st of September. It's at RMIT Story Hall, and he'll be there and he'll be talking about Elastos. So this is a guy who used to be very high up in Microsoft, directly interacting with Bill Gates. So he's a big deal in this sort of space, and having him down in Melbourne is going to be a really exciting, cool thing. If you're not doing anything on the 21st, please come down. It's going to be fun having him around. I'll try and also get him around for a meetup as well while he's here. So if you can't do that, we'll try and set up a meetup, and you guys can all get a chance to meet him and ask him as many questions, and he'll probably answer them a hell of a lot better than I can. Cool. Yeah, so New Cyber Republic, I've been lucky enough to be working on that particular project. So the reason why I say it's going to be really, really cool, partly is because I've been working on it and I've seen what's coming. So there's a lot of really big announcements, some opportunities that didn't exist previously are going to be available to people. So keep an eye out for that. As I said, Trinity will be demoed. There are a couple of really big people in, when I mean big, I mean like influential people in this Elastos ecosystem. So one of the things which I would like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to go to Chiang Mai and meet some of these people and ask them questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask of someone like a Feng Han or Rong or some of the core developers, just shoot them over to me, and I'll try and do my best to get them to answer it, and I'll try and get it taped as well. So feel free to do that. There's a possibility, I think it's a slight possibility, that some of the core team, the development core team from San Francisco, from the US, will be coming down to Melbourne as well. So I'll keep you guys updated for that. Small things like we're going to have t-shirts, like finally, t-shirts and stickers and all these other cool things. But yeah, that's kind of, those are all the major updates for what's happening in London. The big thing will be 25th, which is where a lot of these announcements are going to be released, and probably a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know about. So keep an eye out for that. They'll be live streaming that if you happen to be interested in having a look. Cool. So yeah, I know that was a lot. I hope like it was useful and informative for you. As I said, like feel free to take those Elastos guides, try and digest it in your own time. If there were things that were a little bit over your head today, I'm available to answer any questions. I'll be a lot better at answering questions on a technical basis. Hopefully by the end of this anniversary event, a lot of what I'm going to be doing over there is training. So there's a lot of stuff that I don't know well enough, and hopefully I'll get a little bit better at that. Cool.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So yeah, guys, feel free, please eat all of the food there, because I'm going to eat all of it. So yeah, feel free to socialize. I'd love to meet all of you guys if I haven't had a chance to already. So yeah, stick around, have fun.